This is Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony on FM 92.7 and AM 1400. The Answer.
Good morning, Detroit. Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony. If you missed that first hour, I was a little hot under the collar. Please forgive me. No, don't forgive me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Head over to theanswerdetroit.com. That's theanswerdetroit.com. Download the podcast. You can listen to this show no matter where you are. I was a little hot. I'm not going to lie, because when you are calling for an insurrection against the president of these United States of America and against the Constitution, you're going to have a problem with me. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have our next guest on. Doug Loyd has spent years serving the people of Michigan as a prosecutor who believes justice must be firm, fair, and free from politics. As the prosecuting attorney for Eaton County, he has led complex criminal prosecutions, protected vulnerable communities, overseen economic crime units, and worked tirelessly to uphold the law with integrity. His campaign for attorney general is built on a clear set of principles. He will prosecute without political bias. He will advise lawmakers with common sense and clarity. He will defend the constitutional rights of every Michigander. He will stand against political lawfare and government overreach, and he will root out corruption wherever it hides. Today, we begin by asking the most important questions. Who is Doug Loyd, and why does he believe he is the right person to serve as Michigan's next Attorney General? Doug, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Good morning, John. Great to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Doug, before we get into policy, let's start with you. When people ask, who is Doug Loyd, what do you want them to understand about your character, your values, and the journey that brought you to this moment?
I think the most important thing for me, John, is that people always realize that I'm a family man first. I've been married for 31 years. I have two great sons. Had the opportunity throughout my life to always make sure that I was there for all of them. I got to coach my sons all the way, through school and football and baseball and all those sports that, kids enjoy, and, they were involved in scouting. They're both Eagle Scouts, so I'm always proud of that. Just the things that, that are important in life that you got to think about, because in my job as a prosecutor, I've been a prosecutor for 30 years. I see the worst of the worst. Yeah. And so it's always important to me to remember there's the best of the best. And when you think about your family, you think about your good friends, that's always the best of the best.
Doug, was there like this defining experience in your life or your career that, how do I put this, that shaped the way you see justice and leadership?
I think so. I actually have been doing this a long time. I started in private practice in 1992. It's been 4 years doing a lot of contract law, real estate law, criminal defense. And I had the opportunity in 1996 to actually go to the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office. The then prosecutor, thought that I would be a good fit for public service. And I got in there and I began working with people. And there's a few cases throughout my career where, I had to work with victims that had no one else. Mm-hmm. And you figured out that by being a prosecutor, you were the person who was standing up for the people. You were the person who was going to be the voice of those who might not actually be able to be heard. And on top of that, you had the responsibility of making sure that defendant, until they were proven guilty, that every one of their rights was protected. And so having that dual responsibility, man, that was something where you just said, wow, this is an honor to be placed in this position, to have this much responsibility, because the citizens, of your community, the citizens of the state, they're making sure that you actually do the right thing. And that defendant needs to make sure that he's actually getting justice in that courtroom.
Yeah. Well, one of my mentors has always told me, because I'm a former elected official too. I was a state representative in the state of Illinois. And he used to always tell me, people don't care about your what. They don't care about your where. They don't care about your when. What they really care about is your why. Let's talk about your why. When you decided to run for Attorney General, what was the driving motivation? The moment the moment or concern that made you say Michigan needs a change and I'm stepping forward, and here's why?
Well, for me, I look back at it. I've been the elected prosecutor in Eaton County since 2013. And so I've had the great opportunity as an elected official to actually see how our state has been progressing. And it's funny, people don't think about it, but, your county prosecutors are seeing things at the ground level.
Yep.
If the state is moving in a good fashion, you see that. If the state is going backwards, you see that as well. And I'm also a past president of the Prosecutors Association, so I really had that overall aspect when I was getting up there to the legislature and actually testifying for them a lot. And so I got to see that, there came a point where those good laws that we were putting forward were all of a sudden no longer there. And instead I was going to the legislature to fight back against criminal justice reform that really wasn't benefiting the state. It was only benefiting a select few.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I began to see that our state was moving in the wrong direction, and I began to see certain politicians like the Attorney General actually begin to use the word I. The Attorney General's office is that one position, in my opinion, where you should never hear the word I. Because if you're going to be the chief legal officer, you're representing all 10 million citizens of the state. And that's what your county prosecutor does. When I stand up in court, I don't say Doug Loyd. I don't say I say we the people. And that's the thing. If you're going to be the Attorney General, you should be talking about we the people. And when you begin to use that word I, then you're only concerned about yourself. You're concerned about some political activism. And the Attorney General should be protecting everyone, not just a select group of people.
Wow. Now, Doug Loyd, you've built a career on the idea that justice must be free and fair from political bias. When you look at what happened during COVID, a lot of these local prosecutors picked winners and losers. A lot of them came after people. At least I know that happened definitely in the state that I'm from, Illinois. How do you bring that principle into the Attorney General's office where justice must be free, fair, and free from political bias?
Well, I can tell you, I was the elected prosecutor in COVID. So for me, that has some personal things to it, even personal level and professional. On the professional level, I refused the mandates in my office because I made sure that, those individuals in my office, they were going to have personal choice in regards to that COVID vaccination. They were going to have to decide that, what they wanted to do because, I had one son who was having to fight against wanting to take it while he was at college. I had another son who was in his first job who was being forced to decide, do I want to keep my job? My wife had to basically have her cheeks swabbed if she didn't want to have a shot. So you had all those things on a personal level. Then on a professional level, I was looking around and I'm going, okay, I have an attorney general and I have a governor who are trying to make the local prosecutor their own private police force.
Yep.
And guess what? I don't, I follow the law. I follow the Constitution. I follow the things that actually are real. And so for me personally, I refuse those unconstitutional mandates. And we know they're unconstitutional because they were determined in court to be unconstitutional. And so I wasn't going to make it where small businesses who were just trying to survive were somehow even hurt more. And so in Eaton County, we made sure not to actually, do that. And that's the great thing about, being an elected official, actually having a proven track record. Your listeners can actually go do their research. And the funny thing is they're going to find absolutely nothing about Doug Loyd or Eaton County because Doug Loyd and Eaton County didn't actually prosecute any businesses, didn't prosecute any individuals for COVID. And so, we made sure to actually think about our citizens there. And that's really the important thing. If you're going to be the Attorney General, you need to be able to say, my responsibility is only to the people. I'm not beholden to the governor or the Secretary of State or any other elected official. My job is to work with them, but not for them. I work for we the people.
Wow. You've wow, that was a heck of an answer. You promised to defend constitutional rights without compromise. Which rights do you see right now under the most pressure in Michigan today?
Well, I mean, there's always the First Amendment, right? That to me is that freedom of speech, that freedom of religion. Those seem to be really hot topics. When I'm out there, I've been to about 50 counties so far, and in the time I've been in for running for Attorney General, and the Second Amendment is always a big question as to are we going to make sure to have our gun rights? And I always put that back that you should look at what we have now. And, people talk about constitutional carry, and you can go back to 2018 where, Tom Leonard, when he was Speaker of the House, tried to actually increase that even further. And we've had past attorney generals who have opened that up. But right now we have laws in regards to some of the abilities to carry, like CPLs. And so, while we have that, we have those protections. And I'm a firm believer, if you want to have a gun, you should have a gun.
Yes.
When I talk to people, I always say the thing you need to think about, though, is that person who's, going to be standing next to your car when you leave this gathering or I'm at with you and they have a gun in their waistband, they have a right to carry that gun as well if we're going to go under those same principles. And they have that right to carry that gun in their waistband until such time as they pull it out and they stick it in your face and they carjack you.
Yeah.
I'm an old prosecutor. Once you violate the law, including with a gun, then you lost those abilities to have those rights.
Yeah.
And so, and everyone generally agrees with me on that because most of the citizens, when we talk about the Second Amendment, these are the people that are actually training themselves on it. They're practicing, they're making sure they want to be individuals who are actually, responsible to their community, not be a hindrance.
So true.
And so those are a couple of the aspects that are always out there. But, I think the Constitution flows through most everything we do. So as an elected official, I swear to that Constitution every 4 years when I'm reelected. And so I always say, if you don't understand what you're actually swearing to, then you're not going to actually be able to be able to handle actually representing the Constitution. So I find it important for myself, for my staff to actually have that understanding, because having those abilities to take away people's rights that they are given, that's a large task, and we better be humble about it when we do it.
If you're just joining the show, we're talking to Doug Loyd. He's a candidate to become the next Attorney General for the great state of Michigan. Now, Doug Loyd, corruption is something voters want addressed head on. There's a litany of corrupted incidents that have occurred in Michigan. I've had the Speaker of the House, I've had other Republicans, state representatives and senators on, and they talked about the ghost payrolling. What kind of anti-corruption posture would you bring to the AG's office?
Well, I think the basic one is that you should have an understanding of what an investigation is so that you can actually prosecute. That's the important thing in the Attorney General's office, is that we actually put a leader into that office who understands what these things really mean. For me, I always tell people that the issue that we have is not so much that, there isn't corruption out there. I believe there probably is. But, if you're actually going to do something, when people go, are you going to prosecute someone? Well, we've already seen what happens when we bring a political activist attorney general in who just proceeds to issue charges and then can't even prove the case at the lowest burden in the court system. In this particular case, I'm talking about the electors. The attorney general decides to bring this case forward, and she can't even prove it at a probable cause hearing, at the preliminary examination. That's the lowest burden in the criminal justice system, and her attorneys couldn't even get enough evidence there. Now, as the attorney general, you don't want to do that. These people had rights. They should have never brought that case forward unless they thought they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. Once again, that was her going, I feel like doing this, instead of looking at the facts. And that always concerns me, because we have to nominate people who can actually win the general election. Because if we don't do that, well, you're going to continue to hear, people complain then, because that's what's going to continue to happen, is that people are going to ignore what's out there. So if we want to be able to root out corruption, we have to actually go investigate But in order to investigate, we have to have people like a Republican Secretary of State. We need to have an Attorney General who is a Republican. We need to actually have those people in office, but they have to be electable. And if they're not electable, then once again, we're going to be left with complaints. And we're going to be left with people going, well, I believe things happened. Well, believing things happen won't get you a conviction in the court of law. Actually finding facts and evidence gets you convictions in courts of law. And we've seen from a political activist attorney general what happens when we don't actually have facts and evidence, and we just go forward on the belief that that's what the attorney general felt good about doing.
Yeah. Hey, Doug Loyd, what are your thoughts on the grand jury process? Do you think there needs to be some reform? The old saying, you in a grand jury you can indict a ham sandwich. Do you think there should be some type of reform? And what should it be? Have you thought about that as it relates to the grand jury process? Should we reform it?
Well, I mean, the courts have already held that a one-man grand jury, which was used by this current attorney general or their office, that's not constitutional. So you can't actually have that aspect. The grand jury has its basis. Now, I'm old enough to actually remember when grand juries were being used in the 90s. And the main focus for them in the 90s were when they were talking about drug dealers, drug cartels. And it was being used by prosecutors and by the attorney general in a collaborative form. And the way it was being used was bringing in citizens who would not want to talk in public. And so it does have that ability. But the one great thing about Michigan is that even though we have the grand jury process, we have the ability that prosecutor or that attorney general can look at the defendant and say, okay, even though we brought forward the grand jury aspect, you can have your own preliminary examination. And that's what you need to think about. What that grand jury is basically doing is the prosecutor has to bring in evidence in order to show that grand jury was a crime committed and was it probable that the defendant committed that crime. Now, if the grand jury says yes and they agree that warrants should be issued at that point, in Michigan, we're a two-tiered system that a lot of states don't have, because if I were just to go issue a felony case against someone, then that person would go to the first spot would be district court. And after they were arraigned, they would have a right to a probable cause hearing, a preliminary examination. Now, at that preliminary examination, the prosecutor is going to put on just enough facts and evidence in order to show a judge, was there probable cause to believe a crime was committed, and was it probable to believe the defendant committed that crime?
Yeah.
So if the judge believes that, then it goes to circuit court. Then at circuit court, the defendant has a right to a judge or a jury or a plea, but the prosecutor has to prove the case. Once again, it's all on the prosecutor. The prosecutor has to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
And so that's all you're really taking when you talk about a grand jury, is that aspect. And I can tell you, I've actually used citizen juries before. I used one back in the 90s when I was trying to determine what level of charges for murder did I want to charge a person with. And I actually put a coroner's inquest together, which was another form of grand jury, when I laid out the facts of the case to them and then had them decide for me which level of murder I was going to proceed forward with in the case.
Yeah.
Or they could say I didn't have enough facts at all. Don't do it.
Hey, Doug, we got about a minute and 10 seconds left, but I want to give you an opportunity to speak directly to the voters of Michigan as to why they should pick you and tell people where they can find you.
Sure. You can find me at votedougloyd.com, or always go to my Facebook page at Doug Loyd Prosecutor. For me, look at it this way. I've been an attorney for 34 years. For the last 30, I've been a prosecutor. I've been the Republican elected prosecutor in Eaton County since 2013. I've won 4 elections. I understand how to win. I understand the importance for the citizens of Michigan and what we need to do to move forward. And so, John, I thank you for letting me be on the show this morning, because I think it's important to get the word out let people know that the Attorney General's office is that position where we, the people, actually matters.
All right. He's Doug Loyd, prosecuting attorney for Eaton County, running to be the next Attorney General for the great state of Michigan. Thanks so much for joining us on Detroit's Morning Answer, sir.
Thank you, John.
All right, Doug Loyd. Paul, we're getting a lot of the candidates on lately now. We're going to have one on tomorrow, too. She's running for Senate. U.S. Senate, I should say, tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you. No. You got to tune in tomorrow to find out who. Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back.